A figure stood, yet cast nothing, impossible and deadly. Welcome to Deadly Puzzle. I am your host, Edric Vale. Where are you tuning in from today? Your voices make this journey unforgettable. I always enjoy reading every single one. The rain had begun in the afternoon without hurry, the sort of rain that made a point of tapping every pane on the boulevard before it slid down and disappeared into the gutters. Maigret had taken off his coat and hung it near the stove, where it steamed and gave off that damp, woolly smell he always associated with November. He had his pipe, which was not drawing well. He tamped it with his thumb, tried again, and accepted that it was going to sulk for a while. Madame Maigret moved about the kitchen with her calm efficiency. The soup simmered. Carrots, leeks, the faint sweetness of a bay leaf, a soft clink when she set down the ladle. She was in slippers. He heard the soft scrape of their soles on the linoleum. The drip in the hallway had started up again. The plumber had promised to come in the morning, which meant in 2 or 3 days. He had carried the day's post from the table to the armchair and left it on his lap without opening it. There was a postcard from Pardon in Lausanne, where he was visiting a brother-in-law, a bill for coal, a pamphlet about a pensioners' fund at the ministry that never seemed to concern anyone in particular, and an envelope, grey with a thin loop of handwriting and a cheap violet stamp. He slit it carefully with the blade of his pocket-knife. There was a single sheet, lined paper with blue margins written in a cramped, tidy hand. "Chief Inspector, I do not know if this concerns you." He had paid for the week. He always paid on Saturday, and he left Wednesday at noon precisely. I suppose there is nothing wrong in that. But he left the room in a manner that disturbed me. It was too neat. The bed was made better than I would have made it. The soap had all its corners. It is nothing, perhaps, but to me he was not like others. We had grown used to him without noticing him, do you understand? We all said, when speaking of him, "The quiet one." It rained all week, and yet his shoes were not dirty. Please excuse. "Miss, I'm not a person to make complaints. It's just that you could say he did not leave a shadow. Respectfully, Madame Vernet, Proprietor, Hôtel des Ardennes, Rue Bichat, Paris 10. He read it twice, then held it between 2 fingers and stared at the window. The plane trees on the boulevard were black and their bark shone. An omnibus rolled past in a soft roar as if pulled on felt wheels. He thought of the phrase the woman had used. He did not leave a shadow. It had a way of sticking in the mind like a pebble in a shoe. It did not accuse. It did not even ask for anything. It merely folded itself into a corner of his thoughts and settled there. "Is that from Pardon?" Madame Maigret asked without looking up. "No," he said. "A woman near the canal." He turned the envelope over. No telephone number. That, too, was of a piece. A cheap paper, a neat hand, and no telephone. He pictured the Hôtel des Ardennes without having seen it. The narrow entrance with a glass door, a small sign in gold paint with a flake missing, a thermometer that lied in winter and lied in summer, a bamboo stand for umbrellas. The smell of cabbage water and damp stairs, a bell that had lost its spring. He set the letter on the side table and tried his pipe again. It drew now reluctantly, and the first mouthful of smoke had the bitter taste he liked. He took it out of his mouth and looked at the glowing bowl, as if it could tell him something more precise than the letter had. "Will you go out again this evening?" Madame Maigret asked. "I don't think so." "It's raining," she said. He grunted. That was not a complaint. It was a fact, the way he said it. She came in with the soup and set it on the table, the warmth rising in a cloud that fogged his glasses. He took them off, wiped them with a folded handkerchief he pulled from his waistcoat and put them back on. He ate. The soup was good, the way it always was. He had a sensation of something settling into place, of the day putting its feet up. The telephone on the hall table rang once, a timid sound as if apologizing. It was Lapointe at the quay. "Are you at home, Chief?" Lapointe asked, in that smooth voice of his, as if he had just thought of dropping in, but didn't want to be. "A nuisance, I am," Maigret said. "And you?" "At the office, there's nothing in particular. The judge is restless, Comeliot. He asked about the case of the little clerk from the Rue Réaumur. Nothing pressing. He said to say you needn't hurry in the morning." Small silence. "Unless you want to. Tell Monsieur le Juge that morning comes in its own time." Lapointe chuckled. "Yes, Chief." A pause. "Rains like soup from a ladle, doesn't it?" Maigret looked at the window. "It does." He hung up and came back to the armchair, with the weight of a man who knows he must get up again before long, but decides to make a small ceremony of sitting. He read Pardon's postcard about a hill in Lausanne that one climbed to feel one had earned dinner. He turned the coal bill over and did some sums which he meant to show to nobody. His thumb rested on the envelope from Rue Bichard. He imagined the man. He refused to give him features. The mind sought to be helpful, putting in a moustache here, a parting there, a timid smile, but he let it wait. Shoes not dirty in rain. A bed smoothed and tucked with care. He had known convicts who made their cots that way, out of habit. He had known clerks who did the same, out of discipline. He had known widowers who did it because there was nobody to smooth the sheets for them. Madame Maigret came to the door with her knitting, her shoulders a little hunched, the way women sat when they did not want to let the yarn roll away. "You're thinking about a case," she said. "No," he said. "I'm thinking about someone." "Isn't that the same thing?" Sometimes, he said, they had coffee, the stovepipe ticked. Somewhere upstairs a radio drifted into a waltz and drifted out again as if embarrassed. The rain went on. Now, and then a draught set the curtains to moving. He watched the flame under the coffee pot lick the side of the tin and then fall back, a tongue tasting. He read the letter again before he folded it and put it in his breast pocket. He could have left it on the side table with the coal bill. The envelope would have made a country with the other envelopes, south of the lamp and west of the ashtray, a landscape of obligations that could be met tomorrow. He did not think of it as an obligation. It was like a whistle heard in a courtyard at night, too thin to wake the neighbors, but you heard it. He remembered a certain hotel he had gone to 15 years before, with a balcony that had been propped with a beam, and the way the old proprietor had said, "You notice the way he never sits anywhere a chair has sat before." It was the same kind of observation, the kind that told you nothing and told you everything, depending on the weather in your head. "At what time will you go in tomorrow?" asked Madame Maigret. "After breakfast." "Shall I make the fish?" "If you like." "I bought cod," she said, "the good kind." He smiled. He got up, stretched, put a hand on the shoulder of his coat to see if it would tolerate being put on again if he had to go out. It was still damp. He decided it would be better to wake up a little earlier than usual, have coffee without lingering, and walk by Rue Bichard before going to the quay. He would pass by, that was all. If the hotel was as he pictured it, he would know whether to keep the letter in his pocket a day longer or give it to Lucas to file with the other letters that sometimes came from people who watched too closely, or not at all. He went to the window and stood there, a big man, his hands in his pockets, his pipe on the ledge. He could see the woman on the opposite balcony pouring water on a violin plant. The water ran down the rail and dripped into nothing. A man in a hat took shelter under the awning of the tobacconist, and then, realizing there was no point in waiting, stepped out into the rain with a small resignation that made him seem more human. It would be nothing. Perhaps the man had found a better room with less damp, cheaper bread, a window that did not look on a wall. People left rooms all the time, people with clean shoes and people with mud to the ankles. A man did not owe a shadow to anyone. He turned back to the room. There was his chair, the cushion already molded to him. There was the small glass of Calvados that had appeared while he stood thinking, a habit of Madame Maigret's, like starting the coffee at the right moment without looking. At the clock. He took a slow sip, felt it climb and spread. He didn't say anything. He never explained to her why sometimes a thing that was not a case at all would pull at him more than a theft that had to be solved by Friday. She did not ask. Before he went to bed, he took the letter out again and read the last line. You could say he did not leave a shadow. He put it back in his pocket. In the mirror of the wardrobe, he saw his own bulk, the hang of his jacket, the solid block he cut out of the room. He blew out the match and the reflection dissolved. The rain went on in its businesslike way, washing the city that always needed washing, softening edges, blurring names on posters, erasing and writing at the same time. In the morning he would take the longer way to the quay. He would walk up along the canal, where the barges huddled like cows in a field, their ropes swollen with water, the sailors in sweaters under the bridge watching the drizzle thicken. He would find the Hôtel des Ardennes. He would look at the umbrella stand, the bell, the stairs, and perhaps ask for a room as if he had just come in from the rain. He would wait, listen, and see if, in a place where people came and went, leaving trails of water and mud and brief smells of soap and tobacco, he could notice the shape that had passed and left nothing the eye could hold. In the morning the rain had thinned to a patient drizzle that hung in the air and made the cobbles look as if they had been varnished. He drank his coffee, while Madame Maigret fussed with the stove and said nothing about the cod. He put on his still damp coat and let the door close without a sound, the letter from Rue Bichat in his pocket, where he could feel its stiff edge when he moved. Along the canal the barges were like animals that had stopped in mid-chew. A man in a jersey stood on a deck with his hands deep in his pockets and watched the water shrug under the bridge. There was the smell of diesel and wet rope, and under it that little sourness the canal kept for itself. Maigret walked slowly, the brim of his hat sending water down his collar, and if he took the longer way it was because a man who is going to look at something prefers to let his head arrive at the same time as his feet. Rue Bichat had the grey carefulness of streets that step aside for hospitals. The Hôtel des Ardennes was where he had placed it in his mind, a narrow door with a pane of glass, gold-painted letters on a cracked black board, a flaking thermometer beside it that claimed 19 degrees when his bones knew better. Inside, a bamboo umbrella stand with 2 crooked umbrellas and 1 cane. Her bell that tinkled with the embarrassment of an old woman being asked to dance. She came from a little room behind the counter, with her hands on her apron, as if she had only just remembered she had hands. 50, perhaps. A face that had softened. Around the mouth without becoming soft elsewhere, hair pinned too tightly. She looked at him first as at a customer, then at him at the bulk and the hat, and her eyes did that little adjustment you saw when people arrange their manners inside themselves. "You are Madame Vernet?" he asked. "Yes." And then, cautiously, "Monsieur?" He showed her the letter without taking it out of the envelope, letting her recognize it by the cheap paper and the violet stamp. "Oh, you wrote to me." Her throat moved. "I did not mean to make trouble, monsieur." "Maigret," he said without weight. For a moment she seemed to look at the letter as if it were something that had grown since she put it in the post. Then she nodded once, twice. "I thought perhaps you would think me a foolish woman." He didn't answer that. He set his hat on the counter and looked at the key rack. A small cupboard with numbered hooks and the wear that comes from thousands of keys being lifted and replaced in the same places. On hook 12 there was a pale rectangle where a tag had hung long enough to fade the wood and now was gone. "May I see the room?" "If you like." She came out from behind the desk and went up the stairs ahead of him. The stairs were narrow, the kind that made you careful of your shoulders. There was damp in the corners where the plaster had bubbled and a smell of boiled cabbage that was not unpleasant, because it did not pretend to be anything else. On the landing a door opened a crack, and an eye looked out at them, then closed again. On the second floor she stopped at 12, and opened with a small key she took from her pocket, as if she had hesitated to put it back on its hook. She stood aside. Everything was in its place. The bed had a woolen cover drawn tight and tucked, the pillow with its crease exactly in the middle. The chair under the window sat square to the tablecloth pulled even at the corners. The saucer on the washstand had a sliver of soap with 4 corners, and the faint clean smell that comes when soap has not been used, only unwrapped. Maigret moved around the room the way one moves in a church when nobody is there. He sat on the chair and took his pipe out and did not light it. He put a hand on the bedspread, then drew it away. He looked at the floorboards near the door, where a man would stand and think, "Do I have everything?" He lifted the curtain. The window pane had been wiped with a clean rag not long ago. The square of glass was clearer than the rest, and his finger left a line in the faint mist that had formed since. "He always made the bed like that?" he asked. She nodded. "Not the first week. After that, yes. He said it made him sleep better to leave things proper." "How long?" 3 months. He came at the beginning of September." She folded her hands in front of her, and then unfolded them. "He paid on Saturday, always in advance. He never owed me anything. And on Wednesday. He left at noon. He took his valise and his umbrella. He put the key on the desk, but he did not say goodbye. He said, 'At this evening, madame,' as he always did. Only—" She looked at the bed again, not at him. "When I came up for the linens, I saw he had made it too well. He had dusted the mantel with his sleeve. He had emptied the ashtray, and he did not smoke." Maigret let the silence put its weight into the room. There was a tick somewhere. The old radiator? And a distant noise like a bottle hum from the cafe at the corner. "He never smoked," he said. "Never, and yet—" She moved a step and opened the drawer of the table, showing it empty. "He would leave a match sometimes, as if he wanted to look like other men. You wrote that his shoes were never dirty." "It rained," she said defensively, as if explaining rain to a man from a dry country. "They came in with mud, all of them. The commercial traveller in 15 he leaves. A little trail to his door. But Monsieur Berthier, his shoes were always clean. There was once a puddle on the landing. The boy spilled a pail and he stepped over it like this." She raised her skirt slightly and mimed a careful stride, almost prim. "You see?" And he did not laugh. "Berthier, then." He went to the washstand, looked at the comb, the glass. Nothing left behind, not even a collar stay. There was a new razor with a blade that had not yet been changed. The wastebasket had paper in it, the bottom torn from a newspaper with the cinema programs folded small. He did not touch it. "He received letters?" he asked. "On Thursdays." She brightened a little. It was something she knew. "Always one with a thin blue paper. From Dijon, the stamp. I noticed because it was always the same. Last week there was none. The post came and there was nothing. He did not say anything, but he stood near the door at the hour and then went up without looking at me." "Visitors?" she considered. "A man came twice, a small one with a cap and a jacket that wanted to be a spring jacket. He did not give a name. They spoke in the corridor, quietly, and once a young woman waited in the hall and then went away when he did not come down. I told her she could wait in the little salon. She said no, she had a hat that had been green once. The man with the cap. Before or after the last Thursday?" "Before. The last time was last Tuesday." Her voice hesitated on the day, as if trying it for size. "On Wednesday, at noon, he left. He put his hand in his pocket and felt the letter edge. He did not look at her when he spoke. If you had not written to me, what would you have said about him?" She lifted one shoulder. "That he was polite, that he never drank, that he never spoke loud, that he did not leave. A shadow." He stood then, and the chair made a little scrape that sounded loud. He put the chair back exactly where it had been. "I will not take up the room," he said. "Not yet." In the corridor, a board creaked by itself, the way old wood makes, remarks when the weather changes. "I will walk a little. I will come back perhaps this afternoon if you have no objection." "None," she said quickly, as if his presence were a weight on a shelf that steadied everything. At the door she added with a guilty look, "It is not the money. He owed me nothing." "I know," Maigret said. On the street, the drizzle had turned again into rain, honest rain. He put on his hat and did not raise the collar of his coat. Across the way, the cafe windows were steamed, and men moved behind them with their shoulders hunched and their hands around glasses. He went in not because he wanted a drink, but because rooms like 12 were easier to think about with a glass of something before you and other people's voices rising and falling like a tide you could set your thoughts by. He ordered a calvados and set his pipe on the wet wood of the counter, and while the barman reached for the bottle, he thought of Thursdays, and of a man who left saying "this evening" after sweeping his own traces into the pocket of his sleeve. The calvados was poured slow and bright. He warmed his hands on the glass without raising it at once, watching the room in the back bar mirror. The old man with the newspaper folded to the racing page, the woman with a basket of onions she did not put down, the barman who moved in the small space as if he had learned it the way a man learns his bed in the dark. "You have the hotel across," Maigret said, not as a question. The barman nodded, wiping a clean glass as if that were the only way to keep his hands occupied. "The Ardennes. Madame Vernet has had it since the war. It leaks in the same place every autumn." A man, quiet, not young, who stayed there 3 months. "Monsieur 12, the barman said, without smiling. "They don't bring names here, most of them, only numbers." He took a syrup with water. "Cassis. No wine." He folded the paper napkin in halves, then quarters, like a child making a boat. "Never left crumbs? And did he have visitors?" The barman made the small movement with the head that meant not so much yes as perhaps. "A short one with a cap and a jacket too light for the season. Waited outside mostly. Looked at the clock a lot as if the clock owed him something. Once they walked together as far as the footbridge and stood looking down. They did not look like friends, but they did not look like enemies either. There was a girl one day. Had been green once, you know the kind. She watched the door and then watched the pavement. She did not come in here." "What day is the post heavy?" Maigret asked. The barman shrugged. "We get the post at around 11:15. They too, you can set your glass by it." He drank just a little, and the apple moved through him and did its work without asking for thanks. He put a coin under the wet bottom of the glass to keep it from sticking, and went back across in the rain with his hat low and his hands deep. In the little room behind the desk, Madame Vernet had a ledger and a drawer with a tin box and a handful of keys that had lost their labels. When he asked for the registration card, she produced it with the relief of a person who could at last show something that was not just a feeling. The paper was stiff with blue lines and a border. The writing was even and small, neither a clerk's flourish nor a peasant's block. "Name," he read. "André Berthier." He moved his lips but did not speak the date. Chalon-sur-Saône, for the place of birth. Profession employee. Address Dijon Rue Berbizet 17. The ink had a faint violet cast. "He filled it himself?" he said. "Yes." He asked for a pen and then took out his own. He had papers? An identity card. He showed it without being asked. He kept it in a brown wallet and put it back as if it could break. He looked at the little box where she kept the identity slips of those who forgot them, and saw that it was empty, except for a visiting card of a commercial traveller with a moustache and the smell of verbena oil. He slid the Berthier card back into its envelope and held it between 2 fingers, feeling the small roughness where the pen had pressed. "The boy, the one who spilled the pail," he said. "Is he here?" she called, and a boy of 14, all elbows and hair, came with a mop like a banner. He stared at Maigret, who did not look like anybody he had met except in newspapers. "You remember Monsieur 12, Maigret said. The boy nodded quickly. "He never stepped on the third stair," he said, surprising himself with the importance of his memory. "He knew which one creaks. He always carried his valise himself. He never wanted me to take it." "How did he leave?" Maigret asked. "Did he look back?" "No," the boy said after thinking. He looked at the clock and then at his shoes. Maigret let the boy go with a glance. He stood a moment with the registration card in his hand and then gave it back to the woman. "Will you mind if I sit in the salon for a time?" "Of course not," she said. But when he looked at the window and then at the clock, she saw where his thoughts were and added, "He used to stand in the doorway on Thursdays when the postman came." He nodded. At 11 the bell gave its embarrassed little tinkle, and the postman came in, his cape beaded with water, his moustache pointing at the floor with effort. He took off his cap, shook it once, and laid a bundle flat on the desk as if laying out linen. Madame Vernet counted without counting. A housewife's fingers flick, flick, and there it was among envelopes like others and not like others, a thin blue letter with the corners dog-eared from a long pocket, and the stamp of Dijon franked with a neat round that looked absurdly like a decent coin. She looked at him. She did not move it toward him. She did not move it away. He did not touch it. "Keep it for him," he said softly, "as you would have. If he does not come, we will see." He went back over to the café because he did not want the little bell's voice to be afraid of him. He took the same place at the bar, but the barman, understanding without being told, wiped a square of table by the window and set down a glass and a paper and did not ask what he would have. People do not arrive when you expect them. They arrive when the soup boils over or when the weather changes a fraction. He waited with the air of a man who has decided that waiting is a thing one does like breathing. At first there were the regulars who were regular because their lives circled a clock. Then there were the ones who had no business being anywhere in particular and came in to get dry. The bakery sent up a sweet smell that reminded him of Sundays when he was a child and was made to wash his hands before touching the bread. The hotel door opened and closed and opened again. A man came out with a valise and a kind of defiant cheerfulness. That said, he was going back to the provinces. An old woman in a shawl went in to ask for her niece and came out shaking her head because the niece had gone to the market. Time made a curve and settled. She came after noon, when the street had thinned and the rain had gone small as dust. The hat was the same dull green as memory, its velvet rubbed to a nap in places and flattened in others. She stood a second with her back to the door, the way people do when they are not sure whether to confess or to be brave, and then she pressed her lips and went in. She did not look at the café. He did not move his eyes from the letter that was now a small rectangle under the bell on the desk, the way one keeps one's eyes on a clock when one can hear it, but wants to be certain of the time. She spoke low, to Madame Vernet, and the other woman's mouth made those little shapes that mean comfort without promising anything. From the café, Maigret did not hear the words. He saw only the back of the green hat, and the way one hand worried the strap of her handbag until the leather darkened where her fingers held it. He let it go on a little. People say different things when they think the room belongs to them. Then he put a coin on the saucer and crossed in the wet, his coat shoulders beading, his hat brim dripping. The bell gave its old lady tinkle. The girl turned halfway, enough to show a pale cheek and a mouth that pressed itself flat as though to stop, a cry from escaping. She was younger than he had supposed from the hat, 25 perhaps. Her coat had lost 2 buttons and kept itself together with a safety pin cleverly hidden under the lapel. The hem was dark with water. Her shoes were scuffed, the right, heel worn at the outside edge. They were not dry. "This is Monsieur Maigret," said Madame Vernet, a little proud, a little apologetic. He knows about Monsieur 12. The girl's eyes went from his face to the letter under the bell and back again, as if there were a string between them. She made a small movement with her head that was only later a nod. "I came on Tuesday," she said at once. He did not. "Come down." "That happens," Maigret said. His voice was the kind you would use if you had bumped someone lightly in a doorway. "You are mademoiselle?" She hesitated. Not the calculation of a liar, more the reflex of someone who has learned not to offer herself to strangers. "Jeanine," she said finally. "Jeanine Roussel. And you came today because—" She glanced at the clock as if it had the answer. He said Wednesday. Noon or afternoon? Her fingers pinched the strap again. "Not this Wednesday, another. He said he would know by then." "Know what?" She looked at the floor, where the mat had a bald patch in the middle from 1,000 feet stopping in the same place. If he could take a room on the other side, where the window looks toward the canal. He said he slept badly on the street. Side? Madame Vernet's eyes flicked to him. That was new to her. "Did he tell you his name?" Maigret asked. "André," she said, so quickly that it surprised her. Then slower, as if the name might break. "He said André. Not Berthier?" Her mouth made a small, uncertain shape. "He never said the other." He watched the way she stood. She leaned a little, as if she were used to standing behind a counter and resting one hip against it, the way shopgirls do in the quiet hours. He thought he could smell the iron heat of a laundry, a thin fragrance of violet water that lingered in the fabric of her coat. "You work near here?" he asked. "Rue des Vinaigriers, Blanchisserie Clairette. We do collars for an office on the Boulevard de la Villette. Monsieur André, he came with a small packet once in October asking if we could hurry a shirt. He said the buttons. He did not like them. After that he would pass now and then. He never came in. Except once he sent for you." She took this without surprise, which meant he was not guessing. "I came," she said. "He was on the stairs. He said not to wait in the salon. He said there were drafts. He said he would be 5 minutes, then he did not come." She swallowed. "It was not important. Yet today you came again." Her eyes went to the blue letter. "The post is Thursdays. You know that?" He kept his tone mild. She tightened. Her lips then let them relax. One sees a person at a certain hour by the door. One notices. It is not a crime. Did you ever see the man with the cap? Jacket too light for the weather?" She shook her head, too quickly. No time to think meant truth or fear. "No, there are men with caps everywhere." He did not press. He drew closer to the desk and looked at the letter as if it were a specimen of stamp rather than a thing with words inside. "From Dijon," he said. At that she did surprise him. Not a start, but a little exhale, as if the room had been warmer than she had thought. "Dijon," she repeated. "He said he had no one in Paris." A pause. "He did not speak of before." He took off his hat. Droplets made small clear beads on the worn felt. "You may leave a note for him," he said. "If you like." She glanced at Madame Vernet, who had already found a piece of paper with the hotel name printed at the top in optimistic script. Jeanine took the pencil and bent over the counter. He did not watch her hand. He watched her face, which had a kind of stubborn gentleness, the kind that makes a person carry a parcel home for someone else, even when it is not on their way. She wrote a short line and stopped, then wrote another, and when she put the pencil down, her hand lingered, as if to keep the words from running off the page. "May I—" She made a movement toward the blue envelope, not touching it. A child's way of asking without asking. If he does not come today, perhaps I could take it to him. I could—" "To where?" said Maigret. She reddened in a slow, blotchy way that had nothing coquettish in it. "I don't know his address," she confessed. "Only, he once said Berbice and then laughed. I thought it was a joke. I thought it was a kind of sausage." She looked at him as if that might be funny now. It was not. "Rue Berbice is in Dijon," he said. 17. Her eyes opened a little wider and then closed down again, careful. "Then there is someone. There is always someone," he said. He put his hat back on. "You live where?" "Number 8, 3rd floor back, Rue des Vinaigriers." "The concierge is Madame Pichon. She does not like visitors." She said it as if to save him the trouble of being offended later. "Good," he said. "She will like me no better." Janine looked at him, then at Madame Vernet. "If he comes, we'll tell him," the older woman said quickly. "You may come again if you like." Janine made a small movement that might have been thanks and might have been acceptance of something she had not asked for. She put her gloves on, thin cotton, more for manners than for cold, and buttoned the single surviving button of her coat. When she turned, the green hat caught the light and showed a place where the nap had gone so smooth it reflected like water. He waited a minute after she left, enough so that if she looked back, she would see only the hotel's dark windows and the cafe's steam. Then he went out and kept to the side of the street where the trees were, his step unhurried, his hands in his pockets, a man walking home for his dinner and letting the rain find him. She did not look around. A woman with her kind of pride looks straight ahead because the world is free to look where it likes. She will not pay it any mind. Rue des Vinaigriers had puddles that remembered carriages. A cart stood with sacks of flour half covered. A cat sat on the sacks and blinked at the rain as if it were a personal discourtesy. Janine turned in at the number she had given without hesitation, pushed the door with her shoulder in the way of people who know how much it sticks, and disappeared into the smell of cabbage and soap and blackened stair rails. He paused under the arch, shook his hat once and let his eyes go slow in the gloom. The wall by the boxes had the names written on little cards, all with ink that had run at the edges from damp fingers. Pichon was there, written large in a round. Han that wanted to be respectable. He went in as if he had business there and stopped at the foot of the stairs to listen. On the second landing a broom scraped. An old woman's rhythm, tap, tap, drag. Somewhere a tap dripped into a metal basin. The air had that warm, resigned smell of buildings where people work too hard to keep things clean. He stood a moment, not to spy but to let the place say what it had to say, and then moved toward the little concierge's lodge with the window where a curtain hung half open and a canary sat puffed on a perch, pale yellow as a piece of stale cake. He did not knock on the little window. He stood where the curtain left a triangle of glass and let the habit of the house notice him. After a moment the curtain moved and a face came, pale under a net of grey hair, with the resigned sharpness of someone who spends her days measuring other people's comings and goings so they cannot waste any of hers. "Yes?" she said, before he had time to apologize for the rain on his coat. He showed his card. She read it the way people read bad news in a newspaper, quickly and then again slower, to make sure they would not have to correct themselves later. "Madame." "Pichon?" She nodded without giving him the pleasure of seeing her nod. The canary made a small adjusting motion, as if he had entered a piece of its weather. "I'm looking for Mademoiselle Janine Roussel," he said. "3rd floor back." "She is there," said Madame Pichon, turning her head slightly toward the stairs to indicate the truth lived in that direction. "For once. She runs like a rabbit between the laundry and here. It is no life. She has visitors?" The concierge's mouth tightened in a way that meant she had prepared for that question for years, and now that it had come, she would be measured in her answer. "She is a decent girl," she said. "No men. Sometimes her aunt from Belleville, on a Sunday. Once, twice, perhaps, there was a small man with a cap who stood under the arch. He did not ring. He asked me to tell her he was there. I told him to go to the café if he wanted to stand. He went. When? She folded her hands, inside her cardigan sleeves, in the way old women lock their opinions away. 3 weeks, 4, in that weather. He had a jacket for April and we were in November. He stamped his feet. He smoked cheap. And last week? She hesitated, then gave him a sideways look, as if testing whether he would tell her what he already knew. On Wednesdays, she said. She has 20 minutes when the irons are being cleaned. She comes, changes her shoes, eats a piece of bread with jam and goes out, not far, to the footbridge by the canal. I see her from the lodge if I move the canary. Last Wednesday she came back with her bread still in the paper. She had not eaten it. She went up without a word. The floorboards told me she sat on the bed. I hear these things. He did not smile. He let the silence be kind to her. And today? She was out and in like a cat in the rain, Madame Pichon said. The girl will catch her death and nobody will claim the body. She made a small snort to show she did not mean it, and also that she might. Does she receive letters? Postcards from the aunt about potatoes and the price of string. A bill from the Club of Mutual Aid, 2 francs. Otherwise nothing. She is one of those who look at other people's envelopes and never at their own. He nodded. He took off. His hat for a moment, shook the rain from the brim with that little movement that is almost a salute, and put it back on. If the small man with the cap returns, tell him the police have questions. Do not frighten him. Let him think he is important. Madame Pichon's eyes brightened with the faint malice of an ally who had been drafted. And Mademoiselle Roussel? I will see her at her work, he said. He left a card with her that would serve as a talisman if anyone asked her later why she had talked. The canary fluffed and turned its back as if to say that the matter did not interest it. He went out again, into the courtyard, which had a little drizzle of its own, different from the streets, more private. Blanchisserie Clairette had 2 windows, one always open even in winter to let the steam have its say, and a door with a bell that did not ring but complained. He did not go in. He took the bakery opposite, bought a coffee that came thin and black in a glass, and stood near the door where he could feel the heat and see the women at their boards. Steam rose and fell in slow breaths. The forewoman wore her hair in a tight knot and wielded her iron the way a man handles a spade, with rhythm and attention. Jeanine was farther back, her sleeves rolled, her face pinked with heat, a damp curl stuck to her temple. She did not look toward the door. People who want to see someone and do not want to be seen looking have a way of fixing their gaze on the middle distance, as if the middle distance had a price written on it. A man stood half under the awning near the drainpipe, short, cap pulled down, collar up on a jacket that would have been enough for a spring that never came. The posture tugged at something he had been offered earlier in the day. The man did not smoke now, but his fingers worried pockets in the way of smokers. From time to time, he lifted his head to look at the big clock over the tram stop, and then looked away immediately, as if the clock would charge him for the first look but not for the second. Maigret did nothing. He drank a little of the coffee and let it sit. He took his pipe out and filled it, tamped it softly, put it away again, unlit. A boy in an apron came in from the street with a tray of croissants that smelled of butter and regret. The small man shifted from foot to foot, then left the awning, not toward the laundry door but to the corner where the footbridge began. He leaned on the railing and watched the grey water scuff itself against the stones. At the bell inside, Jeanine sat down, her iron, and went toward the back, wiping her hands on a cloth. She did not take her coat. She went out the rear through the courtyard, coming around to the street from the passage beside the grocer's. She did not see Maigret. The small man did not see her at once. She paused just beyond the corner, straightened. Her hat, then stepped onto the bridge and stood not touching him, not close, a distance that said they had met before, and that the meeting was either too familiar or not familiar enough for tenderness. For a minute neither spoke. The rain made a fine haze and made their coats dark in patches, and the barges under the arches moved not at all. Only the ropes with their swollen knots showed the water was moving. When the small man spoke, it was in a voice that did not carry, and she answered with a tilt of the head more than with words. He took something from his pocket, a folded paper, and held it between his fingers without offering it. She did not take it. She looked at it, then at his face. Then she shook her head, one small motion, and put her hands in her coat pockets as if to keep them from reaching. Maigret slipped out of the bakery and crossed when a delivery truck shielded him. He did not go to them. He stood on the opposite side of the bridge, where his presence would be a fact in their vision if they chose to let facts enter. The small man's eyes brushed him once, bounced off, returned with a jerk, as if attached to a spring. The man took the paper back into his pocket as if it might melt in the damp. He said something quick and low. Janine did not answer. Her mouth had taken on that flattened look again, as if to keep a sound from betraying itself. The small man lifted his chin not in defiance, but to make his throat ready for swallowing something hard, and then he turned, went down the steps, and was gone into the side street, where the tinsmith keeps his hammer going even in rain. Janine stayed a second, more counting in her head perhaps, or just letting the weather do what it wanted. When she turned, she saw him. Her eyes went to his face and then to his hands, to see if they held anything that could judge her. He did not move. He made no sign. After a heartbeat, she went past him, back toward the laundry, walking with that small speed that admits defeat, without making a drama of it. He watched the place where the small man had disappeared, and then the shop fronts as if expecting them to confess. The paper the man had not given her sat in his mind like a loaf left too long in the oven. Present, a little burnt at the edges and making its smell felt. He decided he would let the man imagine himself safe for an hour. Enough time for him to think of what to say to someone who would not ask much. Then he stepped off the bridge and took the street along the canal, the one with the shoe repairer, whose window was strung with laces like black ferns, because if a man wants to leave no shadow, he must come from somewhere, and somewhere always belongs to someone. The shoe repairer had a bench near the window and a lamp with a dusty shade that gave a yellow to everything. The place smelled of glue and damp leather, and the iron filings from the little rasp he used. He barely looked up when Maigret pushed the door, then did a second take at the bulk of him and the hat. "You see everyone's feet," Maigret said, watching the man's hands work. "A small fellow with a cap, jacket too light for the season. He stamps his right foot to keep warm. He would wear his heels down to the outside. The cobbler's needle went in and out." "Him," he said, without interest. "Mignot. Eugène when he owes me, Gégène when he wants me to trust him. If the soles were any thinner, he'd be walking on newspapers. He lives up toward Récollet in a house that wants to be respectable and doesn't quite get there. He owes me 8 francs. He will owe me 8 francs until he dies." "Where does he drink?" The cobbler put the shoe aside, weighing it in his palm. "Au tonneau by the tinsmith. He drinks white because it looks like water and fools nobody." He lifted an eyebrow. "He hasn't done anything. He hasn't the energy." "He'll be warmer with a glass in him," said Maigret. Au tonneau had a zinc counter that showed every glass set down, every elbow leaned. Inside, a stove ticked and made the air fat. Men stood with their backs to each other in the manner of boats at anchor, each in his own weather. Mignot was there with his cap on the bench beside him, and a small glass he hugged with both hands like a man begs a stove for heat. Up close, he was even smaller, his cheeks sharp from the way the skin tightens when there is not enough fat, his ears too big for his face. He had the surprised look of a rabbit who has spent years in a field with no hunters, and one day meets a gun. Maigret did not ask for his name. He ordered a beer and took the stool at Mignot's left, his pipe between. his fingers unlit. He let the room talk around them, until his presence made its own kind of quiet in the space between their shoulders. "You didn't give her the paper," he said at last, turning his head the way you turn your head to let the smoke go elsewhere. Mignot blinked twice, took a swallow that left a little line above his lip, wiped it with the back of his hand, set the glass down carefully. "What paper?" "The one you put back in your pocket because it wouldn't stand the rain," Maigret said. "The girl on the bridge, Janine." Mignot's fingers found a coin and rolled it under his thumb, then lost it and found it again. She put her hands in her pockets. Women do that when they won't take what you offer. She doesn't take gifts. It's not a gift, it's work. A man pays for a thing to be done, the thing must be done. He said it with the stubbornness of someone who has made a life of carrying other people's errands and calling it a living. His eyes went to the door and back. "You are the chief they say goes about with a pipe." Maigret did not correct him. He did not make it heavier. "Who paid you?" he asked. Mignot lifted his shoulders, then let them fall. "Monsieur André, the one in the hotel." He said, "If she comes on Tuesday, you tell her it will be Wednesday. If I am not at the bridge on Wednesday, you wait until Thursday. You give her this." He said it like that, with the days, because men like me count better by market days than by numbers. He put his hand into the pocket of the too-light jacket and took out a folded rectangle, not paper quite, but the cheap, stiff card that keeps its corners in a pocket. He didn't give it. He held it as you hold a coin you owe and don't want to part with because it means your week will be short one sausage. You were to give it to her no matter what. Mignot looked at his glass. It had made a ring on the wood and his finger went around the ring, tidy as if he did not like mess. He said she would take it. He said she would take anything from him. A quick glance up. You were there. You looked like a person who makes other people's pockets. Turn inside out without putting your hands in. I thought better that it go to him than to fall in the canal and make the fish happy. The corner of Maigret's mouth moved without quite being a smile. He held out his hand. Mignot hesitated one heartbeat longer than his courage, then put the card into it. It was a left luggage ticket from the Gare de l'Est, a thin grey thing, with a round hole punched at one end as if it had once been on a string, a number stamped in purple, 417B, and a rubber stamp that said, Mer 12/12. There was a faint greasy mark where a thumb had lived on it for a day. The back had a printed warning about lost tickets and a blue scribble that might have been the clerk's initials, or a drawing made to pass a minute. You see, Mignot said, almost pleading, it is nothing. It is someone's valise. Why didn't you give it to her? He shrugged, a motion so small it was barely there. She has nothing to put in a valise. A valise is a thing for going away. I thought, what do I know? I thought it would be kinder if a man took it. You were paid? 10 francs to wait and 5 to deliver. I did not earn the 5. He picked up his glass, found it empty, looked into it as if the bottom might have changed its mind and set it down. He said not to go to the hotel. He said not to speak to the woman there. He said the letter would come Thursday, and that it would not be for taking. Maigret felt the card between his fingers, its cheapness and the truth of the time on it. Wednesday, a little after noon. The exact minute a man who made his bed too well and said this evening went out under the rain to put a piece of himself where it could be kept by a stranger behind a counter and a ledger. He slid the ticket into his wallet, the way one puts a visiting card one does not want to lose. Where do you sleep, Mignot? On a bed that has seen better shoes, the little man said with a sour half-pride. Pension Cécile Récollet, third up. The landlady is honest as far as the rent and a thief afterward. If I want you, I will find you. You will. Find me, he said with a resignation he wore like his jacket. Thin, but something. Outside, the rain had decided to be fine again, not content to fall, but content to hang in the air and make the light gentler. He did not go back to the hotel. He found a telephone in the back of the cafe next to the tinsmith, where a calendar from a mineral water company showed a girl in a bathing suit that belonged to a season no one in the room had seen in months. La Pointe answered on the second ring, voice young and already a little bored by the quiet shift. Quai. La Pointe. Do we know a Rue Berbizet, 17 in Dijon? Ask the commissariat there if an André Berthier lives or lived there. Born Chalon-sur-Saône. And ask at Gare de l'Est Consigne, number 4117B. See what the ledger says. Time of deposit, any remark. Don't make a noise. Yes, Chief. A pause in which he could hear the boy reaching for his pen, as if the act of writing made the question more official. Are you at the office? I am not. I am near the canal. The judge asked. The judge can ask his soup to be warmer, he said, and hung up without wait. The Gare de l'Est had its own rain, the kind that lived in steam and made coats smell of iron. He walked under the high coffered ceiling with its blackened squares and its pigeons that had learned the timetable better than porters. At the Consigne, behind a counter with a metal lattice, a clerk with a combed moustache and a face that had seen every kind of baggage and had judged none of it, looked up without curiosity. I have a ticket, Maigret said, putting the card. Under the lattice, as one offers something dangerous to a small dog, the man held it delicately between fingers, stained at the tips with the blue of carbon paper. 417B, he said aloud, not because he needed to, but because numbers like to be spoken. He turned to a ledger that had the tidy weight of years and ran his finger down a column. Deposited yesterday, he said. 1213. Brown valise. Medium. 2 francs paid. By whom? The clerk lifted one eyebrow. By the valise, he said dryly, and then, because the man in front of him was the kind who looked at you and left his gaze on you like a coat on a chair, he added, quiet sort. Hat not new. Shoes. He made a small shrug. Clean. I will not take it now, Maigret said. Keep it for me. If anyone asks for it, they cannot. The clerk tapped the ticket with a fingernail, and it made a little sound, like a fly on glass. Without this, it is only furniture. He went out again onto the square where the cabs lined up with their horses steaming and the drivers hunched in their capes, as if rain were a class of tax and they were in arrears. He stood a moment to let the air change him back from the station's weather to the city's. Across the way, a woman with a basket covered with a towel hurried, the towel darkening where the drops hit it, and he thought of cod and of a table where the soup would not wait for a man who came late, but would keep its heat a while anyway. He felt for the ticket in his pocket and found it, and for no reason he could have explained, he was glad that Janine had not taken it with her thin cotton gloves, glad that the small rectangle of cardboard had come to rest where it was, in the big wallet that had contained too many such small unremarkable items that moved a life along to its next corner. He didn't hurry back to the quay. The rain had cleaned the pavements to a dull gleam and made the river smell not of water, but of iron and old wood. In the long hallway under the big clock, Lucas was coming out with his coat on his arm, a cigarette unlit in his mouth, and that look of a man who has been told not to go anywhere and has decided to go anyway. You look wet, Lucas observed. It's the fashion, Maigret said, shaking his hat once. Lapointe was at his desk with a pencil behind his ear and a piece of paper on which he had written, with the solemnity of a child making a list, 3 items: Dijon, Consigne, Hotel. The Consigne we knew, he said, brightening as if he had invented it. The ledger has the time, 12:13. The man at the window remembers shoes and not faces. And Dijon? Lapointe grimaced apologetically. We rang the commissariat. They are ringing back. Rue Berbizet, 17. It exists, of course. Whether a Berthier ever lived or lives, He spread his hands. They are consulting the concierge, and you know how long it takes a concierge to decide whether to know something. Inspector Lognon came in from the corridor like a draft, already frowning at a universe that conspired to waste his days. "They've put me on the purse cutter at the Rue de Rennes," he said to no one in particular. "When it rains, the pickpockets go out with capes. I will catch damp and a reprimand." "You'll catch your death," Lucas said, not unkindly. "If I do, they'll say I did it to avoid work," Lognon muttered, and vanished again with the gloom that, like the smell of cheap tobacco, clung to him even after he had gone. Maigret leaned on the corner of Lapointe's desk and looked at the rain. "On the window. Dijon is not Gare de l'Est," he said. Lapointe nodded eagerly, grateful to be caught up. "You would go to Lyon for Dijon. To leave a valise at the wrong station is deliberate," Maigret finished, more for himself than for the boy. The telephone purred. Lapointe snatched it up and held the receiver an inch off his ear, the way clerks do when they expect to be shouted at and are disappointed. "Quay, yes, yes, of course." He scribbled a name, then another. "Merci, commissaire." He covered the mouthpiece and looked up, pleased to have news. "Rue Berbizet 17 is a pension, Beau Séjour. The proprietress is Madame Jolivet. She says a Monsieur Berthier took his meals there a long while ago, 2 years or more, but did not sleep. He had a room elsewhere. She forwarded letters for him on Thursdays, her word, by arrangement. Last week there was nothing to forward. This week one blue envelope from a notary's office on the Place Bossuet, addressed to him at the hotel you have named." "A notary," Maigret repeated softly, as if a taste had presented itself and asked to be identified. Lapointe's pencil hovered. "Shall I ring the notary?" "Not yet." He straightened. "He will tell you nothing on the telephone and everything if he chooses to later." He put his hat on again, not because the rain had stopped. If anything, it had settled in for its shift, but because the hat was part of being in the weather. He went back to the hotel. The bell had learned to tinkle the exact note his hand made on the glass. Madame Vernet was reading something with her lips moving, and looked up as if she had been caught at it. "Madame," he said, and his eyes went to the little rectangle under the bell. The blue paper made its own pale light. "There is a return," she offered, not quite at ease about having noticed. She turned the envelope with a careful finger. On the flap, a rubber stamp had left a violet trace. "Étude Maître Lafitte, notaire, Place Bossuet, Dijon." "A notary," she echoed, uncertain whether the word was more respectable than alarming. "Did he ever ask you to forward anything to Dijon?" "He wrote sometimes. He put the letter in my box to take at noon. He had a hand like a schoolboy. He used a ruler to underline." She hesitated, and then, as if snatching at a thought before it fled, added, "You asked about his shoes." "There were rubbers." "Galoshes?" "Yes, old ones, folded flat, hung behind the door on a nail. He always put them on in the hall if it rained. I should have said." She looked stricken, like a woman who has remembered too late where she put a key. "It changes nothing," he said gently, though it changed a small irritation in his mind into a place that now fit. "A man who keeps his shoes dry in Paris in November is a man who plans his steps." "Will you take the letter?" she asked, voicing the question as if it had occurred to her in a dream. "No. Keep it for him. If he does not come today, we will see tomorrow." He looked around the small room not to find anything, but to let it tell him what it was. The print of a stag with 2 red flanks, the wooden bowl for keys, the vase with 3 artificial roses that never changed their minds. He left her with the letter and went home in the hour when the streets fill with people who, like him, have done what they could do for a day, and have decided to put off the rest until morning. The smell of cod came up the stairs to meet him with the faithful cheer of things that have been promised. Madame Maigret had her hair a little damp around the temples, and there was a towel hung over the radiator, a domestic flag. "You're late," she said, not reproaching him but pointing it out so that the soup would not feel insulted. "Notary," he said, sitting and stretching his hands toward the warmth as if they were separate creatures. "In Dijon?" she asked. She served the cod with potatoes that had kept their shape and a little butter she had not mentioned buying. "In Dijon," he agreed. They ate. The routine put a kind hand on him. The fork was where it always was, the salt the glass that had belonged to an aunt. He told her the parts of the day that could be told without pulling the thread. "He made his bed," she said when he had finished. "Too well." He looked at her, amused. "Some men do." "They do when they want to please the person who will see it," she said simply. "Not for themselves. If I make the bed badly today, I will sleep in it tonight and not see it where you see it when you come home. He made it for someone else's eyes." "For whose?" "For the person who would come after," she said. She put down her fork to show she was not saying it, to fill the space between mouthfuls. "People leave rooms in 3 ways, as if they're coming back in a minute, as if they never lived there, or as if they want the next person to think they were better than they were. He is the second. He didn't want anyone to think of him at all. And yet," he said, half to himself, "he asked for another room on the canal side." "That is for sleeping," she said. "You ask for a good pillow even when you intend to leave in the morning. A man thinks of the next night before he thinks of the next week." He poured himself a small Calvados and let it warm his breath. "There is a valise at the Gare de l'Est," he said. "Est?" She lifted an eyebrow. She had the geography of Paris in her hands the way she had recipes in her head. "That is not for Dijon." "No." He listened to the rain find the gutters and run in them with confidence. "Tomorrow," he said, not to her so much as to the man who had left no shadow, "we will open it." He did not explain to his wife that it seemed kinder to let the night sit over the little grey ticket like a blanket and take the weight of it for a few hours. The city would not move it. The man behind the lattice would lock the ledger and go home to a wife who would tell him his shoes were wet. The blue letter would lie under the bell. Janine would iron sleeves, the damp rising in front of her like breath. Mignot would blame the weather for a lack that was not entirely the weather's fault. And a notary in Dijon would go home at 6, put his papers away, and perhaps say to his maid that he would not be disturbed if the telephone rang. In the morning he woke before the alarm and lay a minute listening to the rain tell him what day it was. Coffee tasted a little bitter, the way it does when a man has decided what he will do, and the coffee senses there will be no lingering. He put on the coat that had dried stiff and the hat that never quite did, and went out with the ticket in his wallet like a small insistent thought. At the consigne the clerk recognized the number before he looked at the ledger. He went into the dim where rows of valises slept with their labels showing their old addresses like scars, and came back with a brown one that had been carefully mended at the handle with wire and black thread. It was light for its size. Maigret paid, received a nod that meant the world was in order, and carried it the way one carries a cat that is pretending to be asleep. At the quay, he set it on the table in the little room where Lucas kept a trench, coat on a hook and a bottle with 2 fingers of something in the bottom of it, for days when he needed courage and not taste. Lucas came, shut the door with his hip, and stood with his hands in his pockets, the cigarette unlit. "It was waiting for you," Lucas said. "They wait for someone," Maigret said. He sprang the simple lock with his thumbnail and lifted the lid. The smell was of starch and a little camphor. On top a shirt folded the way a shop folds shirts, sleeves tucked, a collar with its paper stay still in place. 2 collars wrapped in tissue, a pair of socks rolled tight as if they were modest. A bar of soap still squared at the corners, wrapped in blue paper with a ship on it. A razor in a leather case that had been rubbed with care. Everything that said a man who lives alone and knows that nobody will put his things straight for him, unless he does it first. Under the shirts a canvas pouch tied with string. He undid the knots slowly, not to prolong anything but because there are knots one unties with the same respect one gives to locks. Inside, papers, a passbook from the Caisse d'Épargne de Dijon with a balance written neatly in violet. 31,000 and some francs, updated with a stamp 10 days ago. An envelope from 2 years back, printed Études Laffitte, with a typed sheet inside, headed in the formal language that makes private matters sound like furniture. Succession Roussel. There were pencil ticks in the margin, a name underlined once and then rubbed, as if the underline had been made in impatience and regretted. A little square of paper torn from a notepad, with Janine Roussel, 8, Rue des Vinaigriers, written in large. The same cramped, tidy hand as the hotel register. As if the address had first been learned and then tested. Lucas whistled under his breath and then stopped because the sound felt wrong in the room. Roussel, he said. A common name, Maigret said, but he let the paper stay under his finger an extra second. There were other things. A train timetable folded 4 times, a stub of ticket for a second-class journey from Dijon to Paris, stamped in September. A cheap watch wrapped in a handkerchief with AB stitched badly in red thread. 2 keys on a ring, one new, one that had learned its lock years ago. No letter addressed to Janine. No explanation written out for the comfort of the living. Lapointe put his head around the door like a boy who had been told to wait and had waited as long as a boy can. "Chief," he said, almost whispering, as if the valise were sleeping. Dijon rang. "The notary Laffitte is at his office. He says he did write yesterday to Monsieur Berthier. He would rather talk in person than on the telephone." "What does he say on the telephone?" "That the succession Roussel concerns a small house sold last month and a sum to be divided. He says Monsieur Berthier has a power of attorney and is expected today at 4 to sign a receipt." "Today?" Maigret repeated, looking at the passbook date. He closed the canvas pouch and laid it on top of the shirt, as if returning a book to a shelf. He shut the valise and pressed the locks down with the heels of his hands. "We will not make him wait for Paris." "You will go?" Lucas asked, already knowing he would not be the one to go. Not yet. He slipped the little square with Janine's address into his wallet beside the ticket, not because he did not know it, but because objects carry a person better than memory. He left the passbook where it was. Some men's lives are in their pockets. His had been in a station. He went out again into a city that had decided to look washed for a few hours. At Rue Bichard, the hotel bell spoke its timid syllable. Madame Vernet had not moved the blue letter. It lay under the bell's round shadow as if belonging to it. "He has not come," she said, making a small apology with her eyes for having noticed. "He will not come this morning." He stood a moment and read the stamp again, though he knew it now. If a man leaves his valise where 1,000 people can walk past it and takes a ticket he means to give to someone else, the valise will tell less than the person. She nodded, not understanding and not needing to. "You will have a room," she offered, practical hospitality standing in for comfort. "Not today." He went back across to the cafe and took the table by the window, the way a man takes the chair in a waiting room. The barman set a coffee he had not asked for and said nothing. He lit his pipe and kept it unlit, the way one keeps a promise for a minute to feel it. Janine came at her hour, that narrow slice the concierge had measured for him. She had her coat, but not her hat, hair pinned hurriedly, a wisp damp on her temple. From the door she could see the desk. Her step slowed. She looked at the letter the way you look at a cake you do not allow yourself. She put a hand into her handbag as if to show herself she had hands. Madame Vernet spoke to her without moving the envelope. Janine did not ask for it. She put down a note on hotel paper, another, or the same revised, and left it there. Then went, as if the act of not taking had used up the courage of her break. He did not stop her. He watched the way her shoulders set when she had to go back into heat and steam and carry other people's sleeves. He finished the coffee, which had gone cool, and called the key from the back, where the calendar girl smiled at a summer that had never visited that café. Lapointe came on, spilling words. "The notary is ready at 4, the boy said. He repeats that a receipt is to be signed by Monsieur Berthier for a sum to be remitted. He won't say the sum to me." "He will say it to someone," Maigret said. "And the judge?" "The judge is lunching at Chartier. He sent word that if you are pursuing a disappearance, it should be registered somewhere, so his minutes will not be surprised." "Let the judge eat," he said, and hung up. On the canal, the barges had taken the noon in their slow way, with a chug and a hesitation. He walked there because there is a kind of thinking that cannot be done indoors. The pass-book's violet. Numbers had the quiet indecency of money when it does not declare itself. The envelope from the notary smelled faintly of office and chalk. The small square with Jeanine's name had a crease where a man's thumb had gone over it too often. He turned back toward the station, as if to reassure himself it was still where he had left it. He would let the day ripen until 4. A man who makes beds too well and says, "This evening," may be hoping the notary likes punctuality, or he may have arranged his absence as meticulously as his sheets. Toward 3, the rain set in again without fuss. He sat once more opposite the hotel and watched umbrellas make small private rooms moving along the pavement. Nobody came for the letter. The little bell did not tire. It tried each time. When he stood at last, it was with the sense that things were not refusing him. They were simply taking their time to show themselves. Dijon would not tell him anything Paris could not have told him, but sometimes a truth travels better by rail. He telephoned the quay from the café and told Lapointe to ask Dijon to put a man at the notary's door at 4:15 and to call the office again at 10 past. He did not say what to do if someone came. There are times when telling a provincial policeman to use his judgment is kinder than handing him a rope he will only trip on. He took the chair by the window, the one the barman kept free for him now, without comment. The street wore its rain like a habit. The blue envelope under the bell was a small square of stubborn calm. From time to time, Madame Vernet touched it with a finger, not to move it, but to confirm that it existed. The clock in the café made a dull sound at the half-hour, a sound that might have been a clock, or might have been a spoon knocking a glass. At 4, the telephone on the wall behind the zinc rang, and the barman jerked his head at him, as if the call had more to do with his hat than with the café. It was Lapointe, his voice pitched low because voices have a way of carrying in tiled rooms. "Dijon," he said. "They've a man on the corner. 4 o'clock came and went. No one went in who looked like your description. The notary's clerk came to the door twice and peered out as if expecting a postman. The notary says he's at your disposal now. Put him on if you can." There was a weight of the kind that makes a person stare at the receiver as if staring would shorten a distance of 300 kilometers. Then another voice, dry and careful, with the exactness of someone who has lived his life among papers that dislike being smudged. "Maître Lafitte," it said. "Monsieur Maigret, you are in Paris." "In Paris," he agreed. "You expected a Monsieur Berthier." "I did. He made the appointment himself by telephone on Friday last. He never comes alone to the Etude. He prefers to do things by correspondence when he can. But on this point he was firm. Today, 4 o'clock. He did not say why in person. He said only that a receipt must be signed. It is a small succession, Roussel house at Chenauve, sold last month. The proceeds are modest. He holds a procuration from the vendor, now deceased, to sell, and another to receive for the account of a third party. "For whose account?" "Jeanine Roussel," said the notary, after a moment in which he seemed to weigh the propriety of a name. "He placed with me 2 months ago a letter addressed to her, to be delivered only when she came in person, or to be destroyed if she did not appear by the end of the year. She has not come. Do you know her?" "I do not. I know only that he asked me to retain from the proceeds a sum to be added to a book he keeps at the case, and that he would take nothing for himself. He is no relation. The question went out of him without emphasis. I have never asked, it is not for me to ask. He was scrupulous. He paid his fees without discussion. He insisted on Thursdays for our exchanges, which was inconvenient. But I arranged it for him. The notary's voice lowered, not in confidence so much as in fatigue. If there is a difficulty, it is not here. The money is in order. The receipt could be signed tomorrow or next week. I tell you this because I have the impression that you care for the person rather than the paper. I care for both when they touch, Maigret said. Quite. A small pause, the sound of someone picking up a pen and putting it down. If there is anything further, I will be here until 6. He thanked him and hung up. He stood a long second with his hand still on the black bakelight, as if warmth could pass back through it. Outside, a woman shook her umbrella before coming in, and did it so thoroughly that she could not help smiling at her own care. The barman dried a glass that did not need drying. At past, he went along the canal to the laundry and stood where the steam came out in puffs and made the rain look like smoke. The irons clinked their steady music. Janine came to the doorway at the change of shift, with her coat already on and her hair still damp at the neck. A woman older than she was shouted something about the price of soap into the back room. Janine made a face that meant there would be no soap no matter what you paid. "Walk with me," he said, not blocking her way. "Only to the bridge." She looked past him as if the street might suggest a different route, then lifted one shoulder and came. She walked a little ahead, the way people do when they have not decided whether to leave you behind. In Dijon, a notary expected a man at 4, he said. He did not come. "I don't know notaries," she answered without rancor. "The succession is Roussel." Her feet made the smallest hesitation, and then took up their step again. They reached the bridge and stopped without having said they would. Barges moved slowly, their wakes rubbing the stones with soft hands. He left. "Me a ticket," he said gently. Her left luggage ticket from the Gare de l'Est. She turned her head. The wisp of hair at her temple had curled itself back in the damp. "For me?" The words came out dry, as if they had been in her mouth a while. "For you," he said. "He told a man to give it to you if Wednesday failed. The man lost his courage." She held the railing not to steady herself. She did not need steadying, but to give her hands a task. "I did not want to take anything," she said. "Not from a person who does not say who he is." "You know who he is," he said, and watched her face not to see whether she would cry, but to see whether she would refuse. "I know who he says he is," she corrected, stubborn as a girl who has taught herself to make bread when the market is closed. "He said André. He said he knew the street." She bit her lip and then let it go, as if that gesture belonged to someone younger. "He stood on the stairs and spoke to me as if the air between floors were safer. He would not sit. He made his bed," Maigret said mildly. "Too well." She gave him a look, not angry, only tired. "He is a man who wipes his glass before he drinks. The first time I thought it was a joke. After, I did not think about it. If I thought, I would be angry, and anger makes one clumsy at the iron. The notary will keep a letter for you," he said. "It will wait a month and then it will not exist. What would he say to me in a letter that he would not say with his mouth?" She spoke without drama, the inquiry flat as a sheet on a bed. "If he is what you think, he had years to say it. He did not." She straightened, as if the subject weighed less now that it had been spoken. "I work until 7, she added, practical because there is comfort in hours that can be counted. "Madame Pichon will say if you come." He put a hand on the railing beside hers. His big fingers looked coarse next to her thin ones and did not try to hide it. "Tomorrow at 11 the post will bring its Thursday. If he does not come, I will ask the judge to let me open the blue envelope. It will be clumsy. Judges make everything they touch a little clumsy, but we will do it. Will you come then? She stared at the water. If I say yes, I am a woman waiting in a hall people talk. She lifted her chin. I will come. They walked back without speaking, because a conversation that has found its shape should not be poked to see if it will change. At the laundry door she paused and said, "He never had mud on his shoes," in a tone that made it a piece of proof about a person the way children say, "He never eats apples," as if that explained a soul. He nodded. She went in. En route. Bichat dusk came in a little earlier than it should with the rain. The cafe windows steamed again, and faces made loomings and disappearings behind them. Mignot hovered in the doorway of Autonneau, as if courage only served to take you from one threshold to another. The hotel's bell tinkled for a man who wanted a room with a view of the backyard and thought that a view of roofs would be quieter. Madame Vernet, without touching it, stood a moment with both hands framing the blue letter, and then drew them back, guilty as a child who has counted money not hers. At the quay, the judge's secretary had left a message in a hand so tidy it could only be from someone who never carried umbrellas in wind. Monsieur le Juge would be grateful to be spared surprises. Lucas held the paper as one holds a cat, arms away from the body. "He means you to tell him what it is before you know." "What it is," Lucas said. "He wants to be wrong in advance," Maigret said. He took his hat again. "Tomorrow 11. He went out into a city that was beginning to turn on its lights one by one, like people remembering names. He did not go home by the shortest way. He went along the canal to the bridge where the iron smelled of rain and hands. He stood a minute where the small man had stood, his cap tugged down with a ticket he did not give. He took out the card in his own pocket and slid a finger along its edge. A piece of cardboard, a balance in a book, a girl in a green hat that had been green once. These were the size of the things that make a life move to a new street. The rest, the notary's stamps, the judge's minutes, would come after, like weather after a decision to go walking. He was at the hotel a little before the post. The cafe had wiped the inside of its windows with a cloth that left long clear ovals like eyes, and in one of them he could see the desk with its bell, the blue envelope still making its small island of quiet on the polished wood. Lucas arrived, with his coat collar up, and the look of a man who resents paper because it will not light a cigarette. He had a sheet folded twice, initialed in a corner by the judge with a flourish large enough to serve as a signature. "He says you may open." "The letter in the interest of the person," Lucas murmured as if the words might bruise. "He adds that he remains responsible to no one." "That is his gift," Maigret said. Janine came in at the hour she had promised, wearing the green hat because it was raining and because people put on hats to make official things official. She stood straighter than she had on the bridge and kept her hands still in her pockets, as if to prevent them from making promises in her place. Madame Vernet wiped the counter, wiped it again, and then folded the rag into a square and put it away. "Shall we?" he asked, and he said it as if they were lifting a trunk together. Madame Vernet put the envelope on the pad of blotting paper and moved aside. He slit it with his pocket-knife, careful not to cut the paper more than he must. The notary's letter had that faint blue that makes a person think of old receipts. The typewriter's letters were full and round, no ribbons, unevenness to catch a lie. He read it in the voice he kept for people who had not slept. Maître Lafitte wrote that, as arranged, he expected Monsieur Berthier that day to sign a receipt for the proceeds of a sale, to be held for and remitted to Mademoiselle Janine Roussel, 8 Rue des Vinaigriers, Paris 10, upon proof of identity, that a letter addressed to her, left with the etude 2 months prior, would be delivered to her in person if she came, that failing her appearance by the 31st of December, the letter would be destroyed unopened as requested, and that any further exchanges could be kept to Thursdays, as was Monsieur Berthier's habit. He did not show them the line where the amount was noted in tidy figures. Money in numbers is like a fever chart. He let Janine read it for herself. She took the paper in both hands because one hand would have shaken. Her eyes moved without faltering. She reached the end, pressed her lips once together as if to seal it inside, and then gave it back. "He knew my address," she said, not accusing, merely laying a fact on the counter between them. "He knew before I told him." "He knew it long," Maigret said. "He wrote it in a hand I saw in another place. He learned it and kept it." She did not ask from where. She looked at the bell, as if the round shadow it cast on the desk could explain a man's habit of Thursdays. "Chinove," she said, so low he would not have heard it if the room had not been small. "I have an aunt there. She writes about potatoes." He folded the judge's sheet and put it back in his pocket. "This afternoon I will go to the hospital," he said. He did not say which. The street said it for him. "I will ask if a man came on the day he left you waiting. If there is an answer, I will bring it to you before evening." "I will be at the irons until 7, she said. He nodded, and did not offer to walk her back. There are distances one respects because crossing them makes the return harder. When she went, he watched the wet marks her shoes left on the mat, and thought of others who left none. Hôpital Saint-Louis lay behind its brick walls like a school that had given up on holidays. The porter at the gate had a nose purpled by cold, and a pencil stuck in his cap. He read the card and made a grunt that meant he had seen many cards and was always willing to see one more. Inside, the corridor smelled of carbolic and wool, and the floor made a wet whisper under shoes. A nun went past, not hurrying, with a basin and a face that did not expect thanks. In admissions, a young man with a black tie and a love of columns opened a ledger at Wednesday and ran a forefinger down a page that looked like the weather report for a city of illnesses. He stopped at a line, frowned to be sure he had not misread the time, and then tapped it. Noon 38, it said, as if the day had been shaved in two. Name, Berthier André. Address given, none. Brought in by himself. Destination, Salé Sea. Remarks, malaise on pavement, collapse at gate. Later, in a different hand, deceased. 1627. The clerk made a movement with his mouth that was not quite regret and not quite disapproval. He had his papers, he said, looking up. Identity card, a wallet with small money, a watch wrapped in a handkerchief. Effects at the commissariat within. We telephoned a number he carried. No answer. He spoke very little. He said, "It will not be long." He was right. He pushed the ledger a little toward Maigret, as if proximity softened it. "Did he ask for anyone?" Maigret asked. The young man shook his head. "He apologized," he said almost angrily. "To the nurse who cut his shirt, to me for the trouble. He said, 'Excuse me,' as if it were a cue, and he had stepped out of it. In the little room where effects go to wait for relatives and the police, there was a paper parcel tied with string and a brown envelope with the hospital stamp. Inside the parcel lay the wallet, the identity card, a folded timetable already too familiar, a matchbox with 2 wooden sticks inside, though the man did not smoke, and a key that had belonged to an old lock. The watch was there, AB in red on, the handkerchief, the edge a little raveled where someone had worried it. He signed the receipt and left the key. People become greedy in death only if the living help them. Outside, the rain had stopped without anyone granting permission. He stood a minute under the plane trees that shed their bark in long satin shavings, and looked at the sky as if it might change its mind again. It seemed right that the man had gone on a Wednesday at an hour children are sent home from school and housewives lean on windowsills. He had planned it, or he had planned so thoroughly that even his failing was on schedule. A man who keeps his shoes clean on wet days does not let chance carry him far. Back at Rue Bichat, he did not go into the hotel at once. He watched the door of the laundry until a face like Janine's, only older, harder, leaned out to shake a rag. He went across when the bell's small tinkle would not startle her. He told Madame Vernet what the hospital ledger said in the fewest words. She made a little movement that might have been a cross, or might have been habit. "I will tell her at 7, he added. "Not before. She irons sleeves now. Sleeves dislike tears." Madame Vernet nodded and reached out as if to touch the blue stationery, and then checked herself. "He was the quiet one," she said helplessly. "He was," he agreed. In the café, the barman put down a calvados without being asked. "On the house," he said, and then quickly, "No, you will pay me, of course." They both smiled at the correction. He drank half and felt it sit in him like a stone in a pond, the ripples going out slowly. On the table, he laid the hospital envelope. He did not open it again. He looked instead at the door of the laundry and thought of a young woman who would put down an iron and unpin her hair, and take her coat and come into a small office where a man would stand without touching her and say what the ledger had said. She would not ask why he had not said he was her father or her uncle, or only a man who owed her something from before she was born. She would put one hand over her mouth and the other on the desk, and then she would stand very straight, because she was the sort who hates to make a scene. He would tell her about a notary who kept Thursdays, and a letter that might be burned at the end of December, and a passbook that had numbers written in violet. He would not tell her about a watch wrapped in a handkerchief with red letters, unless, she asked. He hoped she would not ask. The rain began again, very fine, a lace you see only when it moves. He sat, heavy and patient, and waited for 7 to come the way a patient waits for a nurse to call his name. At 7, the steam from the laundry had thinned, and the street lamps had made small halos in the mist. He stood in the doorway of the hotel because the bell's timid note seemed kinder than the bare tiles of a corridor. Janine crossed the street with her coat collar up and the green hat pulled low. She saw him and did not hurry or slow. Madame Vernet had set a cup on the desk and then removed it, as if cups had nothing to do with this. He told it in 3 sentences: the hour, the hospital, the end. He did not say died, because some words land more softly without being named. She looked at the bell as if the sound it made might have prepared her. Her mouth remained steady. Only the hand that held the strap of her bag slackened and then found the leather again. "Did he say anything?" she asked. "He apologized," Maigret said. "To a nurse, to a clerk. He said it would not be long." She nodded once, as if she had expected him to be the sort of man who would apologize for taking up space. She did not ask to see him. He did not offer. The hospital has ways of making faces all look the same. "There is a notary who keeps a letter. For you," he added, "in Dijon. We can go tomorrow or the next Thursday if you like Thursdays better." She let a breath out that might have been a laugh on another day. "Tomorrow," she said. Then, as if that word had broken a small wall she had built in herself, "He knew my address. He did. And he let me wait on the stairs." "He did," he said again, without defense and without blame. She stood very still for a minute, and in that minute the door opened, and a man asked Madame Vernet if a room with a view on the back existed, and, reassured by the answer, went away to fetch his suitcase. When the door closed and the bell made, "It's apology," Janine said. "I will go home now. Madame Pichon will not like you to bring news to her lodge." She took a step, then another, then turned back. "Thank you," she said in the tone people use when they are thanking a doctor for pain that has been administered cleanly. He did not sleep badly. He did not sleep well. Morning came with a sky the color of dishwater and the train to Dijon. Had windows that showed fields the color of soldiers' coats after a winter. Janine sat opposite him with her hands folded on the bag, and once when the train slowed for a village with a church too big for it, she said, "He did not smoke," as if that still surprised her. He agreed. They did not speak much. "Maître," Lafitte waited in an office with wood that had been polished by the same cloth for 30 years, and a clock that did not dare to tick loudly. He rose and bowed to them both with the same measure of respect, as if he had learned to divide it evenly on a set of scales. Janine gave her name. He looked at her with something like relief in his dryness and went to a drawer. "The letter," he said, placing it on the blotter with a finger that did not quite leave it. "He asked that it be destroyed if you did not come. I'm happy to break something by not breaking it." Janine took it and did not open it at once. The paper had the faint blue of offices. On the flap, when she turned it, there was a straight underline in a ruler's hand, and the initials A.B. in a cramped script that had learned long ago to keep to its lines. She broke the flap with her thumb and read. She did not move, but when she reached the end she went back to the beginning, not because she had missed anything, but because going back is a way of letting a thing exist twice. She put the paper down and kept her fingers on it. "He wrote 'my child' and then he crossed it out," she said, not lifting her eyes. "He wrote 'mademoiselle' after." Maigret did not speak. The notary coughed into a handkerchief in the way formal men give themselves a small privacy. "He says," she went on, her voice even, "that I owe him nothing, that he should have come long ago, and that coming late is worse than not coming, but that money sent by the proper channels may be whispered in a corner when words cannot be. He writes that he has kept Thursdays for me. He asks me to forgive him only if I do not think of him." She gave a small, almost practical smile. "He signs a Berthier and says that if I prefer to think of him as no one at all, I may. He underlines no one with a ruler." The notary busied himself with papers as if the routine would spread itself like a cloth over the nakedness of these minutes. He explained the receipt, the sum, the passbook. He placed before her a paper to sign and then another. He did not say that he had never seen a woman's hand so steady in that room. Maigret stood at the window and watched the square where a man in a blue apron beat dust from a mat with a stick in a rhythm that could have been a march if he had been angrier. When it was done, the notary cleared his throat. "There is another thing," he said, taking care not to look at either of them too directly. "Monsieur Berthier left with me, some time ago, a small parcel to be given to mademoiselle if she came. I confess I did not open it." He handed over a brown envelope that crackled faintly. Janine opened it and drew out a watch wrapped in a handkerchief, with red letters stitched clumsily at one corner. A.B. The red had faded to a brick. The stitching was the work of someone who did not hold a needle often and had stuck his finger the first time. She put the watch in her palm. The glass was scratched. The hands had stopped at a time that did not matter. It was his, she said. He wrapped it. He chose the thread. On the train back, she kept the parcel on her lap. She did not cry. Once she took the handkerchief out and smoothed it with her thumb, as if the red letters might be rearranged to stand for something else. She put it away again, carefully. Back in Paris, there was rain waiting. At Rue Bichat, the bells sounded the way it always sounded, and Madame Vernet looked at their faces and knew enough to put her hands flat on the desk and not say anything. "He will not come," Janine told her. But he paid his week. It was her way of making the world keep its accounts right. In the little salon she sat for a minute, because people like to put their weight on a chair when their life has moved a piece. "I will not take the room," she said finally, half to herself. "The canal is for people who are leaving. I will mend my heel." She stood, and when she offered her hand to Maigret, it was as if offering a receipt to someone in the proper place. "I will write to Chenauve," she said. "To my aunt. I will not tell her everything. There are things for which the rain is enough." She hesitated. "And on Thursdays, perhaps, I will go to the post anyway. Habits are not guilty." He walked a little with her to the bridge and then let her go on alone. Mignot raised his cap under the awning of Autonneau and looked at him with relief that there would be no more messages to carry. The canal took the small afternoon and made it longer. At the quay, the judge had a note, waiting, asking for a report with dates to be entered in the right margin. Lucas had written the names in his big hand and made a small ink blot under Dijon. "It's tidy," Lucas said, approving and a little apologetic. "It is what it is," Maigret said. He left the report half done and went home. The stair smelled of onions and wool. The cod did not wait this time. There was pot-au-feu that had been simmering since noon, and when he lifted the lid, the kitchen filled with a warmth that made the rain seem like a story told by someone who has not been outside. "He?" asked Madame Maigret, soup ladle in hand. "He will not come," he answered. He set the small brown envelope on the sideboard and did not touch it. She did not say, "Poor girl." She put bread on the table and poured wine. After a while he said, "He crossed out my child and wrote Mademoiselle." He did not look at her when he said it. She nodded as if that had explained everything. She took up her knitting afterward, and the needles made a faint talk of their own. Outside the rain made its even sound. He stood at the window with his pipe unlit and watched the pavement shine. People walked with their shoulders forward, the way they do when they know the weather will not change for their sake. Somewhere, in the drawer of a notary in Dijon, a carbon copy found its place between two other papers, and in a small room near the canal, a green hat that had been green once lay on a chair. A man had left no shadow on the stairs. He had arranged it that way. But he had left a bed made too well and a watch wrapped in a red-stitched handkerchief and a habit of Thursdays that would go on a while because people are faithful to the days even when the people are gone. He tamped the bowl of his pipe and did not light it, not yet. There was time. The city went on with its business-like rain, washing away what it could. Some things the rain does not take.